We do product coffee almost every week here. We do it at 7:30 this week. Next week will be at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, so that some of our folks out in Central and Western time zones don't have to get up so early to join us. And we alternate back and forth. And that would the work that we do here, the community that we run here, wouldn't be possible without our sponsors. And I just want to take a quick moment to thank from the bottom of my heart all three of our continuing sponsors. Method, a software design and development agency that does a lot of customer experience and digital transformation strategy, based out of Charlotte with offices in Atlanta, London, Denver, New York. I think I've got all the offices there with a real global presence. With just an amazing team of strategists, designers, and engineers that help enterprise companies solve their biggest digital challenges. And I want to also thank Pragmatic Institute, who's been supporting Product Coffee since the very beginning and is one of the largest and longest running trainers and certifiers of product management professionals. If you're considering professional training in your product management career, you should really check out Pragmatic Institute's courses and materials. They've got a lot of great free content and a lot of really powerful courses. I took one of their courses after almost 20 years in product management. I took one of their courses and still learned new things and was refreshed on powerful concepts. So it's never too late to look at that kind of content. And finally, Feature Upvote, which is a great tool. And I know Michelle was talking about voice of the customer research, and one of the simplest, fastest ways you can get some voice of the customer research is just to give your customers a place to drop some feedback and requests. And Feature Upvote gives you a very simple, fast, easy to set up portal where your customers can make recommendations and suggestions about your product. You can engage them in conversations, and customers can vote on ideas that other people have dropped. You can see that in action at productcoffee.com/ideas, where we take your suggestions for the types of topics that we might cover here in a product coffee session in the future. So check out productcoffee.com/ideas to see Feature Upvote in action. And so thanks to those sponsors, and and we're going to have a couple of new sponsors to announce very soon. I'm very excited about that. We're finishing that up, so be on the lookout for that as well. But today, we've got an old friend, and not saying he's old, although he's getting a little bit older. We got my good friend Alex Sherman back with us, and Alex has been a product management leader here in Atlanta, thought leader here in Atlanta for years, and has been leading Product Camp Atlanta. He has worked as a product manager in several really influential companies. Currently, he's serving as a product coach at Kaiser Permanente, helping them transform their product management practice with internal coaching and process and skills development. And he's going to talk to us today about some of the lessons that he has learned along his storied product management career. I'm going to shut up now and hand the camera and mic over to my friend Alex. Alex, thank you for being here and welcome to Product Coffee.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get this started, if that's okay. Can everyone see my slides all right? Cool. All right.
Yep.
All right. Well, I love the radio DJ sound effects. So hey, everyone, thanks for hanging out today. I know it's pretty early. There's a few folks, I think, from the West Coast that I wanted to call out. I won't say their names, but thank you for waking up at like 4:30 in the morning to hang out with us. So I'm Alex Sherman. Like Jason said, I'm a product coach here at Kaiser Permanente. Before I kind of get into my background, I wanted to kind of give a little bit more context on where this talk came from. So I've been in product now for about 13 years, and I started to write this and put this together when I hit about that 10-year mark. And I started to notice some things that I wish I had known when I first started product management. And so I'm really excited to share some of these themes, some of these practices that I wish I would have known when I first got started. But these are things that I'm still really learning, right? I'm still continuing to learn and hone my skills in. So I'm really excited to be able to share those things with you. So a little bit about my background, where I came from. There's a company on here. I kind of started it was around 2009, right out of college, as a product specialist. It was a very small company. We had about 30 people, and it was a startup within that small company. And we had about 5 people. And we were making software for small businesses. So think business plan builder. We had a drag and drop website builder. We had a CRM system. We had an email service provider. Yes, we made all those things. And there was about 4 or 5 of us building those products and trying to sell them. And so I learned quite a bit. And it was my job, starting out as a product specialist, to be able to help bring on potential partners to help us sell that. So I'd often demo and really go deep into the product with those individuals. In doing that, I realized that the products were pretty bad. And I voiced my opinion on that. And at the time, the COO kind of gave me free rein on just improving the product. So I put on my design hat and my product hat, even though I had no idea what product management was. And so that's where I started to really start to talk to people. And I have a lot of people to thank on this call, like Jason and some other individuals, for things like Product Camp Atlanta. And that really helped accelerate me into kind of this world of product management. But anyways, that was a great experience. I learned quite a bit there. I made a lot of mistakes. I'm sure I wasted a lot of money. And I want to make sure that you all don't waste money in the future. We'll fast forward a few years after that. I went to a company called Daxco. This is another kind of small company. At the time, it was about 250 plus. And we made software for YMCAs. And I was brought on as a product manager, and I was super excited because this was the first time I got to work on a team. And so I'll define a team here because it's something that I'll refer to throughout this talk. When I talk about a team, I'm talking about a small team, software team of a product manager like yourselves or myself, a designer at the very least, some software engineers, and maybe a QA person. So it's maybe 6 to 10 people, very small, as Amazon says, a 2-pizza team. If I was on it, it'd be a 4-pizza team because I love pizza. But it was so exciting. We were co-located, or at least most of us were. I was sitting next to a designer. There were software engineers behind me. They had build monitors. We talked to customers, and it was just an incredible experience. I have so much to thank to those individuals that really opened up my eyes on how to build software. We were a fairly autonomous team. We were remote. Our mothership was in Birmingham, Alabama. And so we had quite a bit of autonomy about how we worked as a team, and we iterated quite a bit. And I had a lot of fun there. And we grew a product going from just a few pilots to a few hundred throughout the United States for different associations of YMCA. Fast forward, then I went to a slightly larger company called IBM. And I worked with a few individuals on this call here, and I learned quite a bit there. I was on a brand new product that was part of the Marketing Cloud at the time. And it really gave me a lot of empathy for enterprise and how enterprise works, but also how IBM was trying to transform themselves and starting to kind of implement design thinking and more agile practices. So that was really interesting to me. And I had a great time there, and there's quite a few lessons learned there too. From there, I went to a company called Pivotal Labs, which is now VMware Tanzu, which I think VMware is about to be bought out here shortly, is my understanding. So quite a few acquisitions happened there. At Pivotal Labs, I was a product management consultant. I had a lot of fun there. I was there for about 4.5 years. It was my job as a product management consultant. What we would do on the Pivotal side, we'd stand up a balanced team of a product manager, a designer, and software engineers. And then we'd literally pair it with the client side with the exact same positions. So we would be product to product, design to design, engineers to engineers. And we'd work with them from anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And we'd go from nothing to a real product in people's hands in that time. So we'd show them all these practices around discovery, delivery, how to optimize for that. And it was so much fun. So I had quite a few learnings there. And I love that because it optimized my opportunity to experiment a little bit on different ways of working with each of those teams. And so I was able to work with teams across retail, fintech, healthcare, defense, telecommunications. So it really exposed me to a lot of different industries, but seeing some patterns that happened. And I'll share some of those learnings here as well. And then finally, I'm here at Kaiser Permanente now. I went to Kaiser because it was a very interesting opportunity. They really checked all the boxes, or at least as many as I thought, to kind of create the right environment to create a real transformation. So as you may know, Kaiser Permanente is kind of an integrated healthcare provider. So we have the insurance and the healthcare system. We're about a little over 80 years old, but we're trying to make quite a bit of change. So there's a lot of interesting things that got me excited. So now I'm here at Kaiser working with not only the teams to show them how to work in this new way, to be more of a product-led organization, so moving away from project to product, but also helping some of the leaders and the directors. You can train and coach teams all day long in how to work in this new way. But if those leaders don't understand it, if they're not aligned, then it becomes very difficult to create the environment for them to be able to succeed into it. So we're working with those individuals across that, and we're experimenting with different ways, and we're learning along the way as well. So it's been a lot of fun. So that's a little bit about my background. I'll get into it. I'll introduce my dogs. You're probably going to hear them. You may hear them. This is Chloe, Layla, and Dingo. We work from home, and so it's the reality. So you may hear them. So I might as well introduce them. Chloe's pretty loud. She's got a deep bark. I'm going to throw out a lot of resources here. I'm going to share these resources, or Jason will share these resources in some way. So don't feel like you have to Google these immediately. Don't feel like you have to write them all down. I'm going to refer to these because these are a lot of resources that help kind of build and support some of the things that I'm about to talk about. So all that to say, don't worry too much about capturing all that information. I've got it for you. So let's get right into it. So these lessons are in no particular order. These are, again, themes that I observed that I wish I had known much earlier on in my career. So the first one, and this is maybe a bit more high level and spicy in some ways, but don't be a hero. And I'll explain what that means. Don't be a hero. We're in a very individualistic culture. In our education system, we're often told to be the best that we can, and we should be to be better than everyone else. And we reward that in different ways. And it doesn't always work out in team dynamics or organizations. And let me tell you a few stories that help kind of build the picture that I'm trying to paint here. So there's a really good book called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Maybe some of you have read the book. Awesome. This is something I refer to on a regular basis, or at least think about on a regular basis when I work with teams. So David Marquet, if you're not familiar, he was a commander of a submarine, and it was the worst performing submarine in the Navy at the time. So he had spent a couple years training for taking over a specific nuclear submarine. 2 weeks before he was supposed to do that, he was turned to another ship, and it was that very poor performing ship. And he only had 2 weeks to be able to prepare for it. So he realized it was not going to be feasible for him to learn everything he needed to know to be able to run the ship in the manner that the Navy wanted him to run it. So he flipped the model on its head. So what he did, he kind of went from this command and control approach that maybe you're used to seeing inside of the military, and he created and allowed everyone to be those leaders and allowed everyone else to make those decisions. So there's two things he did. He gave everybody else the ability to run the ship, but making sure that they had the intent and they would let him know what he was going to do if they were going to change course, whatever it is. The only thing he left for himself was the decision to fire a missile or a firearm. Everything else was run by the individuals themselves. And that completely flipped the model. And to me, this is something I quite often think about. It went from the worst performing naval ship in the Navy to the best performing ship in the Navy, just from those simple tweaks and approaches. And I think that's pretty profound. There's another good book called Team of Teams by General McChrystal. Also, I'm not like super big into the military. I just think these are really good lessons that came from these individuals. You hear this echo in Team of Teams from General McChrystal too, where it was impossible for them to be able to have one individual commanding and controlling all of these troops in Iraq. And so he kind of flipped that on its head as well and empowered a lot of the teams and individuals to make the decisions on their own with the right strategic intent. So all that to say is that sometimes we see heroes as the one individual that we need to be able to help us and show us and drive us. And sometimes we need that inspiration, but sometimes it could backfire on us. So a little bit more that supports this is that maybe you've heard of psychological safety. Google, this is probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, launched a study, I think across, I want to say 150 to 200 teams around what is it that makes the best performing teams. And what they learned is that there's some teams where they had super high performers, but the teams themselves did not perform well at all. Then they had these teams that had okay performers, but those teams performed better than any other teams. And so the observation around that was that kind of core thing around psychological safety. And if you're not familiar with it, it's really interesting. Amy Edmondson is really the pioneer in this, and she wrote a really good book called Teaming. But psychological safety gives us the ability to feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. So be able to speak up. Sometimes you hear it referred to as speak up culture. And this is something that I quite often think about as well. And I'll show you how I incorporate it into the teams I work with. You can bring in all of these modern practices of agile, of lean. You could be more product led and do discovery often. If you don't have some form of psychological safety, if people don't feel like that they can speak up and have real hard, difficult conversations, then none of that matters. So there are ways to bring that in. And so this was a common theme that they saw across those super high performing teams. So again, you could have a team of heroes that don't perform well at all, but you could have a team of, what some people may say is not high performers, but they have the right kind of, they have the right view of psychological safety or the right environment of psych safety to be able to have those conversations. And so that was their top observation. So some ways I try to bring that into play is anytime we're working with a team now, we started to do this at some other companies I was at. We're definitely doing it now here at Kaiser Permanente. We'll introduce all these practices, but at the core of this, we make it very explicit that this is a priority. So we're starting to develop trainings around it. We talk about it. Sometimes just having the artifact of psych safety goes a long way of being able to have those conversations and bring up the difficult conversations that we need to have. Being able to create the space for people to have these discussions, right? So being able to not necessarily call in the quiet people, but at least ask them if somebody's quiet, just asking them if they have a question or a thought or a comment can go a pretty long way. And I think it's very helpful. And then the last one around productive conflict, right? So I think sometimes when people first hear about psychological safety, they think that it's just all kumbaya. And that's not necessarily the case. What it does is actually allows us to have these super hard conversations, right? If something isn't working, if something we released isn't hitting the goal or the metric that we want, let's talk about it, right? Or if we have a pretty big tech risk in it, let's talk about it. We need to be able to have these conversations earlier on so that we can reduce as much risk as possible. So it's something I'm very passionate about. So all that to say, make heroes out of others and try not to be a hero. That doesn't mean to be the best that you, it doesn't mean like don't be the best that you can be. You should always strive to learn continuous improvement, but try to make heroes out of others. So I'm always trying to highlight others. If somebody else had an idea, I always call those individuals out. I make it more about them than me as an individual. And I really try to practice that often. Second one, maybe some of you have heard this, outcomes over output, but it took me a while to learn this and understand what that meant. And it's really only in the past, I'd say 7 to 8 years that we've started to have conversations around what we mean by outcomes over output. So let me at least define what outcome is. And I once tweeted to like Jeff Gothelf and Melissa Perry asking them what they thought outcome means and how you define it, because it's thrown out quite a bit. Most of the time, this is what I saw as the definition, which is an outcome is a measurable change in behavior. So when we talk about a measurable change in behavior, it's who we're building for and what behaviors do we want them to change and how might we measure that, right? Ultimately, we're trying to change behavior in a way ethically, right? As Marty Kagan will say, we want to ethically change some kind of behavior. We're trying to get somebody to use our product more often. We're trying to get them to get more value on it. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to achieve these outcomes. So I had a colleague at Pivotal Labs that said this once, and it just stuck in my head, and I say it all the time, and she was incredible. You can have a project that's on time and under budget, but no one actually uses the product. How many of you have encountered that before? I know I have. I know I can't see most of you. So I'm raising my hand because I've done that quite a bit. And so this is the fundamental core of what we mean over outcomes over output. We can build things all day long, but if nobody uses it and doesn't find value in it, why did we do it? So it took me a few years to really understand what this meant. And I think just now we've got the right kind of vocabulary in place and the right practices in place to help us have those conversations, or at least the right practices to bring that up. So I often think about that. Some ways we help deter some of that, focusing more on outcomes than output. So there's an outcome-based roadmap, and this is something that I've used quite a bit. A friend of mine, Jay Baden-Hill, put this together. He shared it with me years ago, and this is kind of adapted from it. And so not often you don't exactly know what's going to happen or what you're going to be building in the future. You may know what the opportunity is. So maybe we found some opportunities within the market, within our customer base that we want to solve for. I have a quick example here of Miro. So if you're familiar with Miro, it's just an online whiteboarding app. And I've got some opportunities here. And so in the far right, the future, I've got question marks on features and metrics because I'm not exactly sure what the metrics would be or what the features are to solve for this opportunity. And maybe the opportunity is making it easier for product teams to help find opportunities to help them actually create value, right? As we get more to the left, so the later is that maybe we want to help people understand how to focus and where to focus and all of the sticky notes that they're taking and all the research that they're doing inside of their Miro boards. Maybe we know what the metric is that we want to improve, but we don't know what the feature is yet because we haven't done the discovery to validate it. And then towards the left, it's at this point we can start to introduce features because we have a good understanding of the metrics, good understanding of the opportunity, and we've tested and iterated through different lean ideas to validate that these are the right features that are pointing us in the right direction. So we can start to have better conversations between us, our stakeholders, and our teams around the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And those are coming in the form of the opportunities and the metrics. And the features will help us, we think, solve for that. Okay? So it's a really good tool to help create those conversations. Okay, so I see a lot of questions here. I'm happy to hit on some of these questions after that, after I've gone through these. Cool, I'm just now dozing, so I apologize. The third lesson here is hyper-focus. This is so crucial. The most effective organizations, the most effective teams that I've seen are the ones that create some kind of hyper-focus. And that can come in the form of a lot of different ways. I don't have a slide here on strategy, but strategy is so important and I think often misunderstood. Revenue target is not a strategy. A goal is not a strategy. Leveraging insights into a market or your customer base, executing on the vision to be able to solve for those, and then putting in goals to give you indicators if you're heading in the right direction, that creates a more complete strategy, right? So you've got to be able to create hyper focus. And oftentimes, really what we're saying there is, how do we say no to other things? That's often the hardest part of our jobs, is being able to say no to other things. And how might we do that? And I know Jason's putting on a great workshop on Friday to be able to create some of that focus. So we're often left with a lot of ruthless prioritization, and there's a lot of different techniques to be able to do this. Whether you're prioritizing insights from some discovery, or you're prioritizing problems and opportunities that you want to solve for, I often use a 2x2, which is like something you see here. So it could be, how often does this pain happen and how much value does it bring to the customer or us as an organization? So that's always like a quick thing I've got in the back of my pocket that I use often, which is a 2x2. The other thing is, on a daily basis, what's just asking the question, what's the most important thing for us to work on right now? And so on a daily basis, I'm going to work with the team and we're just going to map that out pretty often, right? We're going to look at, what do we want to focus on today? What are the things we want to focus on this week? And what do we want to do in the next 1 to 2 months? And those will be driven from those conversations from that roadmap, right? And if we get even more into the details, if we break down a week, let's say we want to do some discovery. And at the end of the week, we want to do a real test. We want to test out a prototype with real users by Friday. How do we get there? So I'll often start with, we're trying to get to this point to learn about this thing. What do we need to do to get there? And I'll work with the designer and maybe a tech lead to do that. And we'll come up with different ways and techniques for us to get there. So maybe Tuesday, we need to actually talk to some people, because it's really hard to do our jobs if we don't talk to people. By Wednesday, we should be able to synthesize what we learned, right? What are the common themes that we're noticing from those talking points that we discussed with those customers? Thursday, we need to be able to ideate. Let's actually ideate on the different ways that we can solve for those problems. And let's put together a prototype so that we can test it and be ready on Friday. So on a daily basis or a weekly basis, these are the types of things that we're doing, really in the context of discovery as well. All right, I'll keep going. So this is kind of a hard picture to see. This was put together. I was on a team. Um, this came out of a retro, and as a focused retro between myself, the designer, and the tech lead. And we were just trying to figure out different ways for us to really highlight kind of our discovery backlog. And to the left, you'll see these are epics and ideas. In the middle is exploring. These are the things, we've got a WIP limit. We're only going to focus on these two things in discovery. And we're going to hypothesize. And I'm going to draft hypothesis on how we might solve for those. And then if we validated them, they go into planning, and I'll start to break those things down into user stories. Now, I look at this was put together 7 years ago. I would totally change a lot of this and a lot of the language. On the far left, I still use Kanban boards or discovery backlogs with teams today, but we turn those into opportunities or outcomes, right? What are the big opportunities we're trying to solve for? We may not know what the ideas are yet. So it's kind of premature for us to say that those are ideas, because we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves as a team into one particular solution when it may not be the right solution. So those are some of the changes that I would make. But making these things visible and intentional really helps create and drive those conversations about how are we doing this, what's the value, and what do we need to do next? So it creates that focus that we need. So Jason talked about the opportunity solution tree earlier by Teresa Torres. This is also something we're experimenting with. It's kind of like an alternate view of a roadmap. And I love it because it really ties the work that you're doing to those outcomes that I talked about to create even more focus. And again, when we talk about an outcome, what behavior are we trying to change at the very top of that? Through discovery, you discover several opportunities, and that's what is highlighted in green here. And maybe it doesn't make sense for you to solve for all of those opportunities. I think it was Matt Bettina was saying earlier, maybe there is an opportunity to solve for a problem, maybe it's not the right problem to solve right now. And so through different ways of prioritizing, you need to be able to focus on what the right opportunities are based on your strategy, right? What are you going to say no to? But below that, what Teresa does is that she opens it up to more experimentation. This is where discovery continues, is that what are the different ways we can solve for these opportunities, and what experiments can we run? Should we create a prototype? Should we put some, we want to optimize a flow and throw some A/B tests out there to solve for that opportunity? What are the different ways? What's the fastest way that we can learn that this is going to make the behavior change that we want with our customers? So we've been experimenting with this a lot. It creates a lot of focus as well. I've had good experience with it. I'm also doing it from the coaching perspective. So when we engage with a team or a set of teams, we'll use the opportunity solution tree to highlight some of the different ways that we'll engage with teams and what's working and what's not working. It's a great way for us as coaches to kind of share and learn throughout our adventures here. So the other thing I want to talk about with creating focus is I wish I would have learned this earlier. I think I was talking to Jeff a couple of days ago, where they teach design thinking in his kid's school. And I wish I would have learned this in like elementary school, but it's just basic design thinking approaches. And we're talking about diverging, emerging, and converging. This is a framework that I use on a daily basis. If I'm using it for a meeting, I'll use it to design workshops, but it's also how, what we use to discover in discovery as well. And so this is such a huge and fundamental and easy to use framework that I think it's pretty implicit, but I really wish I would have been trained on this. And there's a really good book called Game Storming that goes into the more details of it on like what diverging and emerging and converging means. But really it's a tool that you can use to help create hyper-focus. And I think it's done a lot for my career in really just being able to facilitate sometimes hard conversations and get people to have the discussions that we need to be able to move forward, or really highlight what we need to be able to learn. So really good stuff. And all it is that if you take any kind of workshop or any session, let's say you want to learn about your customers. Well, let's diverge. Let's diverge in all the things that we want to learn about. Let's go wide and just write our assumptions about what we have about our customers. Then we'll emerge. We'll let everybody kind of write sticky notes. We'll see the common patterns and themes around the assumptions that we have. That's where emerging happens. We have a discussion around it. But we can't ask all of these questions, and we're not going to be able to learn or test out all of these assumptions. So we've got to be able to converge, and we need to make a decision. And there's different techniques that you can use in each of these. So when we diverge, you can use a how might we prompt to be able to get people to think and to go wide. Emerging, we're just talking about grouping and affinitizing the information that we've created. Converging is all about prioritization. So if you want to use dot votes or blind dot voting or some kind of 2x2 prioritization tool, that's what we're trying to do. So this happens at not only like our regular daily meeting level, but this is what we're doing at a product level. And so I just wish more people would talk about it and learn more about it. If I'm working with a team and they don't have this framework, I'll often show them how to use this framework because it's a hack that I use. If I'm in a meeting and I don't know what the individual or the group is trying to achieve, I'll try to think, where are they? Are they diverging? Are they emerging or are they converging? Because it's a very different conversation if we're just talking about a discussion, right? We're going to have different tools and techniques to get there. Are we trying to make a decision? And if those individuals think we're making a decision and some other individuals think we're having a discussion, we're going to get nowhere. So being explicit about where we are in these diamonds, this is, again, basic design thinking, is going to take you a long way. All right, I'll keep going. I see a lot of good questions, so I'm hoping I can get to those after this. So 4, short feedback loops. Short feedback loops. So this is a good quote by Shane Parrish. He has a really good podcast called The Knowledge Project. It's not just about building products. It cuts across life lessons as well. But he says this in a book he wrote called The Great Mental Models. The shorter the distance between our decisions and our consequences, the faster that we can learn. And that's something I wish I could have known much earlier on, is how might we make short feedback loops where we can. And you know, another good lesson here is that often we can end up being at a company or in a place, and I think about this quote quite a bit, where even smart, well-educated people can struggle to learn from experience. We all know someone who's been at the office for 20 years and claims to have 20 years of experience, but they really have 1 year repeated 20 times. And I never want to be that person, right? No, I don't think anybody does. So how might we continue to learn or create those short feedback loops where we can? So there's a really good book called Peak, and this is by Anders Ericsson. And so Anders Ericsson is really well known for the individual who kind of highlighted that to master something, you have to have 10,000 hours of practice. And that's been kind of obscured in a way, and he talks about it in the book. But also he kind of highlights that this is mostly around objective activities, right? So when we talk about chess, ballet, golf, whatever it may be, he's primarily talking about 10,000 hours in that case. But I think there is a lesson in there that does translate to what we do, which is a bit more subjective and ambiguous in product management, which is that you want to be able to create short feedback loops. And the faster you can create those mechanisms, the faster that you're going to be able to master those things. And I think that's something that translates well to what we do. And we do that on a regular basis, right? I think most of you are fully aware of retrospectives, and I hope you do them. I'm a big fan of doing retrospectives every week. So if I'm doing it with a team I'm working with, if you're doing it every 2 weeks, I think that's great. But don't skip a retro. This is your opportunity to inspect and adapt as a team. You could say you're doing all of these other agile practices, but I'd argue, I don't know if you're agile if you're not doing retros, right? So where can we create short feedback loops between us as individuals? We can control that, right? But don't only do retrospectives as a team, do them on the practices that you practice on a regular basis. So I have here an example. Often I'll get teams to just step back and say, what do we want to change about how we do discovery? What do we want to change about how we do delivery? So we'll put some stickies up. We'll talk about our different artifacts. When we talk to customers, what do we like and dislike? So here I've got like a timeline of artifacts of like the different techniques we would use in discovery, ranging from generating assumptions to doing customer research to ideating. And then I've got a line that's like a plus and a minus, like what's working well and not working well. This is pretty transformative for teams when they just sit back and reflect on some of their regular practices. If they don't have time to inspect and adapt, then they're not really improving on some of that, right? So giving them the space to be able to do that goes a long way. So I love doing these kinds of things. So all that to say, try to create short feedback loops with your team, your customers, and even your stakeholders. If you've got a particularly difficult stakeholder, that may blow up at times, maybe have a shorter feedback loop with them, maybe on a daily basis if you need to, right? I've certainly done that. So that's my hack, is where can I create short feedback loops? When we talk about Agile, if we think about Agile is all about creating a shorter feedback loop at the end of a development lifecycle, right? Let's do 2 weeks instead of 6 months. But Agile doesn't have a brain. Agile assumes that you know what the right things are to build. That's why Lean and the Lean startup got so popular after over the last 10, 11 years, is that it created another short feedback loop before we actually went into scalable development. So there's a theme here, right? Short feedback loops is what we need to be able to help us learn pretty quickly. All right, the last thing I'll hit up here, and then we can jam on some questions or get into groups here, is discovery. So I heard a lot of people talking about discovery, and I think it certainly talks about, discovery means different things to different people, but I may be talking about it a little bit differently here in the context of our learning. So for me, the big learning and aha moment was, don't only do discovery on your customers, which I'll say that took me a while because I was blindly following people to not talk to customers. And it was pretty transformative when I started to talk to them. It makes your job a lot easier, but apply those approaches and techniques to your team, to your stakeholders in your organization. These are the same skills that are transferable for us to uncover what it is that we want to solve for our customers. It works for our teams and our stakeholders in our organization. Everything's a product. Treat everything like a product. One of my colleagues used to say that, and I firmly believe that, right? And I think it's super important. So doing your discovery really makes your job a lot easier. I know I've said this before and I've heard other people say it, but how many of you have ever had that feeling of like, I hope this works? It's a pretty raw feeling, right? And we do discovery to help us understand what the right things are to build. Sometimes people think it's a negotiation. There's a lot more to that. If we think about it in the context of our stakeholders and when we talk to them, if they want us to build a feature, we're trying to help them understand the problem we're trying to solve, and that may not be the right thing. So Daniel Kahneman says this. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for Behavioral Economics, wrote a great book called Think Fast and Slow. And he's mentioned in probably most modern product and business books in the past 15, 20 years. But he said this once, which is negotiation is not about trying to convince the other guy. It's about trying to understand them. And that resonates really well with discovery. I was a product management consultant and I fell for the canned responses to some of these difficult questions we would get. But it wasn't until I really stood back and started to ask the questions behind the questions that really helped me understand that I've got to employ discovery into everything that we do. So instead of using prototypes early and iterating often with user feedback, what I've learned is, this is from, I think, a McKinsey study that was done a few years ago, 60% of the surveyed companies only use prototypes late in the development process for internal use only. 60% of companies aren't or do discovery pretty late, which is kind of wild to me. What's the fastest way that you can learn that this product is the right thing to build, right? So that's just very interesting to me. I'll kind of blow through these last ones when we get to questions. So, it's all about creating informed decisions. It's removing, I hope this works, and it's about creating clearer direction when we use discovery. So use it to understand your organization, use it to understand your customers, and use it to understand your stakeholders. Always do discovery. All right, so I'll wrap it up. So 1, don't be a hero, make heroes out of others. Always try to strive for outcomes over output. Create hyper-focus where you can. Short feedback loops will save your life and help you learn much faster. And always be doing discovery with your customers and your organization. So I know we've got about 15 minutes left. So Jason, we can either do questions or we can do that breakout room. It's up to you.
I think there are a lot of questions.
Yeah, so I see one from Allison. It said, how do you introduce practicing psychological safety with leadership? That's a really good question. So we are starting to experiment with bringing in a workshop. And we did our first one a couple weeks ago, and it went really well. And the intention of this is to just introduce the concept of psychological safety, something for them to be able to have the conversation around and something for them to be aware of. So it was really high level. It was just about an hour and a half, but we also had the opportunity to kind of go through and have them generate ways in which that they thought their environment wasn't psychologically safe. And that was pretty cathartic for them. And so we let them kind of sit in that, but we also challenge them to generate ways to solve for some of those instances. And that was a lot of fun. So it's something that we're still tweaking around, but the basics there is introduction, empowering them to be able to solve for those. The next iteration of that is going a little bit deeper and doing like a psychological safety assessment. And there's a really good one out there. It's like 7 questions by Amy Edmondson. And that is usually a springboard for what you can do in different techniques to solve for some of those. Yeah, good question.
And there was a question from Chuck asking about the outcome roadmap. And the question was, how do you leverage that against sales who may want more specific features definition?
Yeah, I think you can still use that as a conversation piece with sales, right? Sit with sales, work with those customers to understand what is it that they're actually trying to solve for. But if there's some like customers that are really passionate about a particular feature that are, pushing sales to get it there, use them as your pilot, right? Use them as your pilot. Like, hey, I understand you're trying to solve for this and you think it's this. Let's work together. Let's try it out. And we'll work very closely with you on that. And so I turn it into an opportunity to bring them into the discovery and ideation point of it.
Thank you for that, Alex. Yeah, I think all the questions were answered so far. Maybe we can move to
them. Why don't we take a few minutes then? And we've only got a few minutes left, but I think for the next 7 minutes, we do have a question from Michelle, but then after that, we'll jump into some breakout rooms for about 5 to 7 minutes and get people to rapid fire their hard lessons learned, things that they've learned. And then we'll come back in here and get some folks to throw out some of the things that they talked about. But Michelle asks, any advice for discovery with physicians? Even getting access to our current physician customers is extremely challenging, let alone accessing physician non-customers with little to no budget to pay for participation, especially at physician hourly rates or dollar rates. So, Alex, Kaiser's a great place. You may have some folks on your team struggling with that too.
Yeah, so that is a very difficult thing here. However, we do have the advantage where they work for Kaiser as well. And so there's a little bit more, drive to be able to work with us on that. So we do have a lot of physicians that are willing to work with us, but we are very careful about how much time we spend with them. And then, I think you brought up a good point there, Michelle, is that physicians, their rates are pretty high. Sometimes you have to create some kind of proxy, right? If there's some kind of observation that you can do, if they're open to that, without taking too much of their time, sometimes just observations will go a pretty long way. And that doesn't necessarily mean interrupting or disrupting their flow. So I know there's a lot of things you're trying to learn, but just being around will create quite a bit of a eye-opening experience for you in your discovery, right? And that's what's the less barriers that you can put up for them and make it smoother for them so that you can ride along. That's often what we've done. So when I've worked with another healthcare company in the past, it was us hanging out in their waiting room, right? We were trying to figure out, I think, a certain part of the flow of like the patient flow. And so we were able to just hang out and observe, and we learned quite a bit, and we were able to talk to some of those individuals. Yeah. Happy to talk more about that offline as well.
Thanks everybody for joining us today.